We have now arrived at the third and final installment in the Seven Swords story. The story picks back up 4 years in the future on August 9th, 1985. During that 4 year period, Andrew Collins had embarked on an independent voyage to modern-day Egypt back in September of 1981. During that time, he received a curious stone artifact depicting the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, which he would keep as a souvenir. Jumping back to the present, which in this case is 1985, we follow a man named Colin Padden. Colin Padden wakes up on the morning of August 9th after experiencing a vivid, recurrent dream involving a strange spirit who has been repeatedly visiting him in his dreams, as it stands before a giant oak tree in the middle of a wooded area. Within this dream, he is able to retain imagery of the environment in which the dream had taken place, and he begins to organize a search party to seek out this mysterious wooded location in the belief that this dream contains symbolic significance and that he should seek it out in the real world. After about a week, Colin Padden, along with his wife and a couple who were close family friends, would all travel to a secluded wooded area nearby, suspected of being the area Padden had experienced his dream. For the next several hours, all members would begin searching the woods. After following a couple of clues and hints that lined up with imagery he had seen in his dream, Colin Padden and the others would come across two side-by-side 18-inch swords buried a few feet in the ground. After dislodging the swords, Colin Padden, with the only other adult male who was a member of the search party, would continue investigating the woods for another hour while the others waited in the car. He would eventually come across a large open clearing in the middle of the woods. Stepping into the clearing, he would immediately recognize a huge oak tree identical to the one he saw in his dream. The significance of this discovery has not been revealed yet. It must be remembered that at this point in time, Colin Padden and Andrew Collins do not know each other, nor is Padden aware of the swords that Collins and his colleagues had within their possession. One night in January of 1986, Mr. Padden would randomly chance upon a televised documentary film he had stumbled upon one night after work. And within this broadcasting, Andrew Collins featured in a segment titled The Strange Affair of the Glastonbury Legends. During the show, Andrew Collins pulled out and revealed the Mianaya sword he and Graham Phillips uncovered under mysterious circumstances back in 1979. After pausing the film to study the sword more closely, he and his wife were in utter disbelief and astonishment to realize the twin swords they unearthed in the woods 5 months prior were an identical match to the ones being shown on TV by Andrew Collins. The following day, Colin Padden would write a letter to Andrew Collins describing the bizarre synchronicities in their respective swords, along with the strange circumstances in which both men found them. About a week later, Andrew Collins would finally arrange to visit them at their home, and he would begin to discuss everything he has experienced up until this point revolving these artifacts. Since the Paddens were already aware that Andrew Collins initially found his sword back in 1979, he would begin to bring the family up to date with all his recent activities in the years that have passed since then. Andrew Collins would begin studying their swords and was able to verify that all three swords are indeed identical matches of each other. Now, if you're asking me why are there four swords in the image you're looking at now as opposed to three, that is because Andrew Collins, since the years that passed since 1979, returned his sword to its original owner, meaning at this time they only had two, and the other two you're seeing in the image were discovered shortly following this, and I will detail their discovery in the next scenes to come. The following day, they would all return to the woods to conduct a meditation in hopes that Colin Padden could pick up any psychic material as to their next plan of action. Nothing of substantial value is produced as a result, other than a nagging suspicion that there are four more swords somewhere out there, and that at some point in the near future all seven swords will be found and brought together to complete some sort of prophetic event which would carry monumental significance. By this time in the story, another considerable amount of time has passed. For the next several months, Andrew Collins would frequently visit the Paddens' home in an attempt to psychometrize the three swords to gain further information. It must be understood that after Andrew Collins visited the Padden family and spent a couple of months visiting them to psychometrize their three swords and gain further information, they weren't able to gain any more conclusive evidence as far as their next plan of action revolving these mysterious swords. And so, because of that, they would drop the matter for a time. We now find ourselves fast forwarded to April of 1987, and Andrew Collins will be on other psychic quests while still in the midst of the Seven Sword Dilemma. By this time, Collins would have long moved on from being in contact with the Sunderland family and had only really still been in contact with Graham Phillips. We find ourselves thrust in the midst of the Black Alchemist affair during this time. I have already made a video detailing the events of the Black Alchemist affair. All you need to know is that by 1987, Andrew Collins will be in close association with another psychic by the name of Bernard. Bernard, a 41-year-old man, is the most prophetic psychic Collins has ever worked with up until this point. And while they are busy finding stones at different churches hunting the Black Alchemist, they are also spending the meantime discussing the newly found connections to the Mianai sword lineage. One lead that Collins found while doing research on the fables of the Seven Swords, he was able to find a unique connection with Mary the Virgin, mother of Jesus, and her seven sorrows. We aren't entirely sure why, but there seems to be a small, highly concentrated congress of highly organized secret societies with very long-standing ties to the mysteries surrounding the Christian faith. Andrew Collins dives deep under the surface to uncover the mysterious connections between some of these secret societies, the seven Mianai swords, and how it all connects to the biblical stories of the Bible and its historical. By August of 1987, Bernard would go on to provide Collins with extremely valuable information in the Mianai sword lineage. While cleaning out his attic one Saturday morning, Bernard would stumble across an extremely old dream journal entry he had recorded over 25 years ago back in 1962 when he was only 16 years of age. This dream journal entry, which he found stuffed away in his attic, would prove to be very strange indeed, as Bernard had no plausible explanation as to why he would still be in possession of such a seemingly insignificant note. However, after rereading the contents of this journal entry, he would go on to discover that the contents of this dream would describe in detail the interior architecture of the estate of former Prime Minister Royalist and high-ranking politician John Stuart, the third Earl of Bute, who lived in the middle of the 18th century from 1713 until his death in 1792. The Earl of Bute is significant because one of the leading designers and architects that helped him build his famous estate, known as Cardiff Castle, is a man by the name of William Burgs. William Burgs was a high-ranking Freemason, and through his connections with the British royal family, it is suspected that he was actually the one who designed and manufactured the original seven Mianaya swords. William Burgs had connections in very high places, along with an incredible wealth of knowledge into medieval history and customs. So it was not at all surprising to at least suspect he had the means to possibly construct the Mianaya swords. After visiting Lord Bute's castle in Wales, United Kingdom, Andrew Collins would go on an extensive tour of the castle, as he is guided through its many great halls and temple-like rooms, with the intention of furthering his knowledge on the type of individuals Bute and Burgs were. During the tour, Collins is shocked to find that many of the architectural designs and interior structures are in exact alignment with the things seen by Bernard in his dream of this place back in 1962. After the tour ends, Collins will have an extensive conversation with the guide of Cardiff Castle, who will not only go on to verify much of the historical accounts he already knew, but would also take him into some of Bute's private rooms known as the summer and winter smoking rooms. These rooms were not a part of the tour, and this would allow Collins to gain even deeper insight into the type of people Bute and Burgs were. This room served a variety of different purposes. From the moment they stepped within the walls of the winter smoking room, they got the immediate and distinct impression that there was an almost tangible, mystical presence permeating through the walls of the winter smoking room. After studying the interior architecture and design, they were able to conclude that this is indeed where Butte and Burke spent the majority of their time. Following the tour at Cardiff Castle, we fast forward another 2 years in the future as we briefly follow the activities of a few people by the name of Dave Hunt, Charles Topham, and Angela Reeve. Now, I apologize, but I do not have images of these people. By January of 1989, through a mixture of psychical intuition, along with a streak of dumb luck, these individuals were able to independently find 3 more Mionite swords, and through their connections with Graham Phillips, they would eventually have a total of 5 swords within their possession. Now, since these three had connections with Graham Phillips, and since Graham still was in connection with Andrew Collins by this time, they would all arrange to have a get together at a local restaurant to discuss the varying circumstances in which all the swords were found. After a lengthy discussion, we can summarize that 1 sword was found at the Knight's Pool, 2 swords were found together in the woods by the Paddens, 1 was found at a place known as Tentacle Castle, which is a museum dedicated to King Arthur founded by Dave Hunt, and then 2 more were purchased together at an antique fair by Charles Topham and Angela Reeve. Following this, all involved would go their separate ways and return to everyday life. However, they would still remain in contact with each other. In particular, Graham Phillips would begin independently undertaking more psychic questing with Dave Hunt and Angela Reeve. Due to some inexplicable peculiarity, it would seem as though when a high number of psychics come into close contact with one another, they are able to produce truly unbelievable and bizarre material, as over 25 reports were produced during Graham Phillips' time working with them. Curiously, during the same period of time, Collins would also reconnect with a woman named Helen. In spiritualism and parapsychology, the phenomena of an apport is the materialization of an item or article from one location to another through metaphysical means. It was stated by Collins that over the many years that have passed since 1979, back when the Aleister Crowley ceremony was supposed to be conducted, Helen has developed into a more holistic and balanced individual, as it would seem she was able to sever some of the more negative psychical ties she had been carrying with her for the greater half of a decade. With the help of Helen, along with other psychics who would make it on the scene, it would eventually be confirmed that the swords were fashioned somewhere in Britain during the onset of the early modern period in the year 1772. It was also said that the original swords fashioned during this time were suspected of being used for a highly important political ceremony in an attempt to overthrow the Hanoverian monarchs and reestablish the rule of the Stuart dynasty. It was because of this mystical ceremony designed to overthrow the political system dominating at the time that shows us the motive behind the original manufacturing of the Mionite swords back in medieval England. This upheaval was to be commenced by a quasi-Masonic lodge known as the Strict Observance. The Strict Observance was secretly in close association with the Scottish Templars, and due to this revivalist movement, a great deal of religious importance was placed on the original 16th century Mionite swords. They believed that it was their destiny to reestablish the royal bloodline of the Stuart dynasty in what they believed to be preparation for the new epoch of the second coming of Jesus Christ. However, the mystical ceremony conducted by the strict observance had ended in failure, and their efforts had ultimately proved fruitless. Following this, the original Mionite swords would fall into obscurity, passing through different quasi-Masonic groups for a time until a new batch of swords were refashioned during the following century. Revelation. We fast forward 100 years in the future as we follow a woman named Mary Heth, who is the leading figure and moving force behind a powerful organization known as the Fire Phoenix Group. The full gravity and significance behind this individual is not entirely clear to me. However, we do know that Mary Heth was a psychic and true visionary, with an uncanny intuition about future events. For the next several chapters, the many adept psychics involved with this Earth quest will begin picking up on vivid visions and dreams involving the past occurrences of Mary Heth's life, along with various individuals she was involved with. Among the most significant things to note as to why she is important to the story lies behind a bizarre, polished piece of orange gemstone she had in her possession, known as the Eye of Fire. We eventually come to find that this orange gemstone, known as the Eye of Fire, was a highly important ritualistic item that had been sought after by the corrupt global organization known as the Wheel. We also come to find that during Mary Hef's lifetime, the two chief representatives of the Wheel are two men by the name of John Newton Langley and Eugene Ventris. By this time in the story, it is 1990, and the brunt of psychic material has been produced by Colin's girlfriend and questing mate, Deborah. Literally for weeks now, Deborah has been involuntarily picking up on the activities of Mary Heth and her Fire Phoenix group, where it would eventually go on to be revealed that in order to stop the Wheel from obtaining control of the energy matrix, Mary Heth would secretly withdraw to a place known as St. Bennett's Abbey to cast away the Eye of Firestone so that the Wheel representatives could never take control of it. The reason John Newton Langley and Eugene Ventris are so significant to this story is because Eugene Ventris, who was John Langley's predecessor, had established yet another highly powerful occult order known as the Work of Mercy, which was established to herald in a new epoch of the Second Coming of Christ, which was expected by modern Wheel representatives to take place in the year 2000. As all this information is coming to Deborah, she is then given the distinct impression that St. Bennett's Abbey is still important to today in modern-day Britain, and that it was up to them, meaning Collins and Deborah, to travel to St. Bennett's Abbey in order to dispel any negative forces still present there. Arriving at St. Bennett's Abbey a few days later, Collins, Deborah, and 6 other questing members will explore the 12th century old Abbey grounds looking for any clues. During this time, Deborah is still in direct contact with a number of spirits associated with the Abbey's history, and through them, she would eventually be led to the approximate location where Mary Heth discarded the Eye of Fire. After performing an extensive visualization technique, all 8 members of the questing party will conjoin into a small circle to perform a group meditation. The purpose of this meditation was to first establish a cone of protection around them from any malevolent thought forms, and also to dispel the negative serpentine energies permeating the premises. However, during Colin's visualization, he made a critical error in the establishing of his psychical cone of protection, leaving them unknowingly susceptible to a psychic attack. John Newton Langley was one of the main driving forces behind the negative serpentine energy which had been permeating through St. Bennett's Abbey for the past 100 years. And it was because of this residual energy of negative pressure that had went on to explain why Deborah, who was the most powerful psychic present, was the one to be attacked. After performing a banishment ritual where Andrew Collins envisions a radiant glimmer of blue light pouring into Deborah's back in an attempt to revitalize her chakra system, only then would she begin to slowly regain consciousness. Following this, for the next several chapters, Andrew Collins would be in contact with a number of individuals to help piece together his growing knowledge surrounding this entire affair. Deborah, Collins, and another questing member named Mark would travel to a series of locations, from Lund's Tower to St. Helen's Well, finding artifact after artifact, all the while communing with the primordial earth spirit of the land of Britain. As she is guided from place of power to place of power, dispelling all types of energy fields until we eventually come to a place known as Pistol Reader Waterfall. Pistol Reader Waterfall was the final location that they had to travel to in order to dispel the final place of power established there. All the while during these various trips, a number of artifacts and paranormally produced reports have been popping up with growing frequency, only going on to confirm the validity of their bizarre endeavors. Upon arriving at Pistol Reader, the group of psychic questers will once again establish a ritual meditation circle and begin using the found artifacts to invoke dark entity. What happens next, literally none of them could have hoped to prepare for. After successfully initiating the invocation, their ultimate plan was to bring out the destructive serpentine forces and ultimately banish it. As the word serpentine would suggest, the dark forces were symbolically portrayed as a gigantic serpent, and this is exactly what all would witness on a psychical level. Deborah being the most important character at this point in the whole story, it will come as no surprise when we find that as soon as this gigantic skyscraper tall red serpent closes the distance on them on a psychical level, it immediately envelops all of them in a sickening auric bubble of red negative energy. And the only way to dispel of this monstrosity, which was attacking them on a psychical level, was to use the original Mionaya sword as a catalyst, as they envisioned the serpent being swallowed up by the potent protective powers of the Mionaya swords, as they envisioned the swords casting the serpent back into the earth and subsequently dispelling its influence entirely. This ordeal was not entirely over though, as all involved had now been exposed and as a consequence had been completely engulfed in a negative energy field of a life-draining atmosphere, with Deborah getting the worst of it. To the constant rushing waters of the Pistol Reader waterfall. After cleansing their oars, all 8 questing members will clairvoyantly see the image of Saint Ellen, the spirit guide who up until recently had been directing and guiding their actions, as she imparts a sign of gratitude and appreciation towards them for helping to dispel the energy matrix established there. After the image of St. Ellen disappears, a shimmering bright light can be seen whirling in the waters of the Pistol Reader. Upon grabbing it, all would stare in utter shock and amazement as a turquoise glazed Celtic cross had now been seen in the hand of Deborah, as it literally materialized out of thin air right before their very eyes. Andrew Collins never does find the seventh sword, but through his extensive work and investigations, along with the help of some very prolific psychics, he does help regain some balance to the energy matrix of the mainlands of Britain. And with this, the book concludes, leaving the reader with an open invitation to find the seventh sword themselves. It must be understood that some of the more bizarre occurrences in this story took place on a psychical, not physical level. And if you do a little bit of independent research, you will find that there was indeed a large organization of secret societies and covert